Hello, everyone, and welcome into Between the Ears. It is the morning after. I'm Schuyler, Callihan. That's Christopher Hall. West Virginia falling to Baylor 49-35 yesterday, dropping the record to 5-5 on the season. Chris, it was just one of those days defensively, and that's really pretty much the story of this game. When you score 35 points, that's plenty enough. And everyone wants to talk about the quarterback situation, whether it's Garrett Green or Nico, who's the better quarterback, who's the better quarterback for this game. But to me, this is all on the defense. And I know Baylor's been playing much better on that side of the ball recently, but you can't give up 35 points and a half and expect to win a game in this league. And I know this is not on Jeff Kuntz. Like, I know we can start, finger pointing and putting the blame on him, but at this point, this is just on the head coach. Like, this is about talent acquisition, it's about development, and that side of the ball has just been horrendous all season long, regardless of who was coordinating it. And it just shows last week was just kind of a one off. They kind of actually played well for three quarters, but against the pass, it's just been a nightmare all season long.
Yeah, and they've struggled with the same routes, the same everything on that side of the ball. I don't get how their players haven't learned how to play zone. Like how you're the deep guy responsibility and you continue to let them run right by you. Um, it's truly like it's flabbergasting. That's probably the best word. I just don't understand how they have yet to learn this. And while it's easy to say, well, why didn't they blitz? Well, they were throwing a lot of quick passes, so that's kind of negates that. But the linebackers continuing to drop too far deep. We've talked about that early in the year. And when they're throwing short passes and they continue to drop just drop back and let it happen everything right in front of them, they did a better job in the third quarter where they were still dropping eight, came up and made plays, and we've seen Iowa State do that for years. That they got better, but that first half was atrocious, and they just could never find their footing. And it took 35 points for them to kind of figure it out. And then offensively, when they figured out defensively, that's where you can make the argument on quarterbacks. They regressed in the second half. So you know, yeah, Neal Brown's going to take the blame. He's the head coach, but at some point, players have to take responsibility. Like as a unit, as a team, they can never play together for a game. They haven't all season. I think Garrett completed 49% of his passes yesterday. Like that's not going to cut it. A lot of his passes were way off again. So his decision making was just back to he's always a step or two behind. So yeah, when Baylor they came in a really good offensive team, they put up over 30 points a game. You know you're going to have to come in and score a bunch of points, and when they needed them to do it in the second half, they couldn't. But yeah, there's plenty of blame to go around. I think on this one, I think really you have to take a long, hard look defensively, whether it's philosophy, whether look they have been rated in the secondary for years now. Something's got to change there. Um, Take your lumps with freshmen and hope that you can retain them. I really don't know at this point defensively
Yeah.
because the secondary has just been so bad this year. Like, can it get worse? Yes, sadly, it can get worse all around. But at the same time, I just don't know what you do defensively at this point. Like, something's got to change. I don't know if it's because they changed philosophy a little bit at the beginning of the year. Whatever it is, it's got to get figured out. And if you think Neal Brown's getting fired, like, very doubtful at this point in time.
I think the biggest concern right now is that there's just no answers. Like you're 10 games in and there's no way to get this thing fixed in season. It's going to be something that has to happen in the off season. And this is where I kind of feel bad for Jeff Kuntz because this is the first time getting to be a defense coordinator at this level, at the Power Four level. And this is kind of the unit he's got to work with in the final two games. And guess what? UCF, they can put up points too. Texas Tech, they're just like Baylor. They're going to throw it all over the yard too. So this is not an easy test for him, and I think it's kind of an unfair assessment of how good that he could be as a defensive coordinator. You're not really going to get a good read on him because of this defensive unit, but misfits in the run game, missed tackles all game long in the run and pass game. They struggled to get off blocks on the perimeter when they did throw those little quick outs or the quick screens. They couldn't get off the blocks. That was what sprung a lot of those
Early in the game, there
misses.
was a lot of holding on that side of the ball. This
There
first
was
games, there was
on the
a
perimeter, yeah,
ton on
on
the
the
perimeter.
perimeter.
Yes, it was pretty bad.
But for whatever reason, it looks like there's just no confidence in this defense, and there's no knowledge of what they're supposed to do. They almost look lost at times, like especially late in the game when it was still sort of a game, sort of not. And Baylor went down and scored. And I think that's what made it 49-28. Like that drive right there just showed me like they had no confidence at whatsoever to get a stop on that drive. And I think at some point you kind of lose hope. You don't have that same buy-in factor that you did earlier in the year when the coach could just say, "Hey, we're just still trying to figure this out. We're going to get on page." When you're 10 games in, you are what you are. And I just don't know that you're going to be able to find any answers in these final two games that can give you enough of a chance um, to get to bowl eligibility. Because I mean, UCF is not playing great, but their offense is good enough to give you enough troubles to beat you. Texas Tech is the same thing, so that's troublesome. But offensively, with Garrett Green, I agree. Like I think to an extent, I should say there was probably at least five dropped passes yesterday. So there's gonna that those would have certainly helped his completion percentage, but had those been caught, you're probably talking he's around his normal 55 or 54%, whatever it was. So Garrett is still Garrett, and the same thing applies to him. At this point, he is what he is. He's not the 60 plus percent completion percentage passer like Neal Brown and everyone else drummed him up to be this year in the offseason. It's just not what he is. The question is, do you go back to Nico now? Because you have two games left. You're out of the Big 12 title race, essentially. Mathematically, you're still alive thanks to Kansas beating BYU yesterday, but you need like a 988 things to happen for you to get there, plus winning your final two. So, do you go back to Nico now to just start to see what you have? This is kind of what Neil did 2 years ago with Garrett when he started the last few games in 2022. Do you go back to Nico or do you try to let this thing ride out with Garrett?
I mean, ride it out with Garrett at this point. I mean, Nico didn't really set the world on fire at Cincinnati either, so it's just I think it's you're still in bowl contention. I think you just ride with your guy, but yeah, he's not going to get really much better. Um, it's just the whole thing is just such a mess right now, and we can really dissect it from when they played Penn State game one and they got exposed early, and they've never been able to catch back up because they just don't have the talent to overcome something like that. Um, and it's not really on the loss isn't on Garrett despite them not scoring the second half. It's you're putting so much pressure on a group of guys that aren't super talented. And when you put that much pressure on a bunch of guys that's not super talented, you get forced plays, you get MAs because they're cutting routes short, they're sped up, and that's essentially what's happening. And they played well in the first half where they were able to keep up. Defense got enough stops there to do something, but they just could never answer. So to me, it's complementary football. We just have not seen it all year, and really it starts defensively because when
Yeah.
you can't get stops early in the game to capture momentum and get a lead, where you're leaning on another team instead of the other team leaning on you and really dictating the game, that's where your issue lies. And it really goes back to me for that. And you're having the same players making the same mistakes and you kind of got to ride it out because the guys behind them are even worse. So it's just it really is falls on the defense, and I don't obviously I don't have an answer for it. I don't you can't we can sit there and say well they can just zero blitz and play man and live and die off of it. Kind of that was my thought process yesterday. Like just start sending pressure. Like what have you got to lose because they're not stopping them right now? Like just mix it up, do something. So, I mean, you just kind of lost. I'm just pretty much been at a loss for words because of how bad it looked yesterday, and not sure where they can really recuperate and go from here. Because you mentioned that final drive that kind of put Baylor really in control. And that pass interference, which was extremely questionable, they quit after that. Like it was
Yep.
just so deflating for them.
It
And I
was
think
obvious.
it's just at that, like, yeah, you're going to get bad calls. Like it happens. Like you're not used to this at this point, 10 games in. Like you can't let that beat you. And they did. And it just reflected throughout the team. They talked about, Traylon Ray's injury affecting the team. Well, Trey Latham, it happened at TCU last year,
ECU.
and they overcame it.
Albert
So
Burks in the same game.
they're not, it's happened to them before, and they responded. It's just whatever for whatever reason, this group this year has just been their head has just been in a fog. And again, you go back to Penn State where they just got punched in the mouth, where they were really hyped up and thought that they were going to do something this year, and they've just never recovered. So yeah, that definitely reflects on leadership. But I think at the end of the day, this team talent is just not there. And when you need them to all come together and play complementary football, it just has not been there. You can probably throw a game here, a half a game in there where they've done that and been able to pull out those 5 wins. Well, let's say 4 because Albany's Albany.
Yeah.
But after that, you don't have really much to hang your hat on, and it goes with the offensive line to the running. Like everybody's at fault because no one's been a superstar, no one's been an all conference performer. You could probably say Trotter's in that mix or TJ Jackson. That's 2 out of 11. You need all 11 on the same page. So
Milo, maybe.
yeah, Milam, but yeah,
That's about it.
We're talking about 3 players, and where they've really struggled is where you've needed some guys to at least be honorable mention, but that's nowhere to be found.
The weird thing about this year is it's such a clear split between home and away with this football team, and you go back through the schedule, and it sort of makes sense because a lot of their more tougher, challenging games have occurred at home. Some of their easier games have taken place on the road, but I mean, these last two against Cincinnati and Baylor, those were really the first two where I felt like, in terms of where the teams are talent wise, are pretty even, or at least in the same ballpark as West Virginia. And so it wasn't like one was an easy road game at Cincinnati or yesterday was a hard game against Baylor. They're 1-1 in these games, and I just don't know why this team is struggling so much at home. I don't know if it's a mental thing, if it's just a distractions thing. But when this team goes on the road, they can go on the road with their backup quarterback and win 2 games. But when they come and play at home, they don't have that same success. And I don't have an answer for that either. Now, yesterday, I felt like there was an extra bounce in their step in the first maybe drive or two of that game against Baylor. Once it kind of started to get that ping pong back and forth type of feel to it, you could start to feel like there was a little bit of questioning, a little bit of hesitancy on both sides of the ball. And you just can't play with that. You got to play 100 miles an hour or you're going to have things like this happen to you. So, do you have an answer as to why this team has struggled so much at home? Because I sure as hell don't.
Confidence and the teams that they've played, because teams have been able to punch them in the mouth, and they resort back to what happened to them previous games at home. So yeah, the schedule worked out for them where the tougher games are at home, right? And the easy games end up being on the road, and you should be able to
That's what you
protect
would
home
want.
field. Yeah, that's exactly what you would want. It did not go in their favor, and from every reason I've just stated, defensively, it's just been bad. And again, I just don't. I think they just did the same drop 8 over and over and over and over. And when you can't cover the inside receiver go route, teams are going to do it to you if you're not bringing pressure. And they continue to do it, and they continue to be wide open. And you just sit there and wonder, how does this keep happening over and over? How is it the same players doing the same mistakes over and over and over and over? Surely these coaching staff has told them week in, week out, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, and yet they continue to make the same mistakes. Tackling, they worked on it all fall camp, um, and it hasn't translated into the season. Like nothing defensively has translated into the season
No.
outside of the defensive front. But yesterday, they only sent 3 or 4 guys at a time. Last week, they caused turnovers by battling up pressure constantly. They lived and died by it, but they didn't this week. So why is that? Because of the short passing game? Because if you bring pressure and get your hands up, you'll be able to knock those balls down. So at some point, yeah, Kuntz has to take responsibility because you didn't replicate what you did the week before. And you can say it's matchup or that, where you're just out thinking yourself at this point. Because if you're not mixing it up when things are just going haywire and they're going right down the field anyway, why not? Because what you're doing right now isn't working.
Right.
Now they were doing the same thing in the third quarter and got better tackling, but at the same time, they weren't causing turnovers. They weren't changing field position. Now you can say, well, the offense didn't do anything, and that's what I mean. Like, there's just no complementary football right now. There's zero. And you
Yeah.
saw some of that last year towards the tail end, but you're not seeing it this year because the defense have just never improved. Like, they have just lost all confidence. They can't. I don't know if they're just overthinking it, and it's zone. Like, don't let the run guy by you. Like,
Fall to
it's
your drop.
really not. It's fall to your drop and continue with the guy that's running by you because that's your side of the field. So just I have no idea what's going on with some of these corners, but it just has not clicked.
The whole complimentary football thing was my biggest issue yesterday because you finally started to see the defense get some stops in the third quarter, and each time they got a stop, you're like, oh, okay, that's a surprise. And then you're like, okay, now the offense would go down, tie the game up. Didn't happen. They'd get another stop. Okay, this is where they go down, tie the game up. Didn't happen. Get another stop. This is time where they go tie the game up. Didn't happen. It's like you had so many missed opportunities where your defense got stops. You could have not only tied the game up, but took the lead in that game. And they just never were able to finish drives. And to me, this is what goes back to I don't know if you want to say play. I always hate to really judge play calling, but when you're setting yourselves up for third and longs constantly, when it's the jet sweeps with Rodney Gallagher, whether it's running east and west with CJ Donaldson, or just constantly running into the teeth of the defense with Garrett Green, and I mean, this is a guy that had an upper body injury, more than likely that we can't specify or confirm, but probably a head injury, right? And he had 22 carries in his first game back. That can't happen. I know how good of a runner he is. He's electric. I get that. But there's a reason why you have a 240-pound running back at CJ Donaldson. He only had 9 carries yesterday, most of which came in the first half. Like, stop going away from him. There's a reason why he's as good as he is. I just don't get it. The last 4 games, and I shared this on the post game show last night. The last 4 home games for West Virginia in the third quarter of those 4 games, they've totaled they have a grand total of 3 points offensively. That's not going to cut it. Not in this league.
Yeah, and it's because I mean, it just goes back to the offenses and their talents as they think they are. Like, yeah, they'll run the ball on first down, they'll mix it up and try to throw it on first down, but they just go run into a wall, regardless if it's inside or outside. I mean, you can go back and dissect the tape, but they try to get it in between the tackles, they're getting hit. So and then you go to the passing game when Garrett scrambles, the receivers aren't extending their routes or breaking anywhere. It's almost like they're trying to post up in basketball and think that that's going to work. Like, it's
Got to fight
just
for
bad
space.
football. Like, they can never put a full half together. And it's completely, it makes no sense. Like, I don't know how you can be successful at one thing and then the next half just be completely off
Incompetent,
kiltered. Like, yes, the other team makes adjustments, but like as a
as should you.
player, you should be making the adjustments as well. And they're not. It just doesn't work. Like, it's either the offensive line or the running backs are making bad decisions on where to hit the hole. It's always something. And yes, play calling can definitely be dissected, but at the same time, stuff that works isn't all of a sudden successful for a multitude of reasons. And then you try to switch it up a little bit, and it's not successful. It's just everything always snowballs with this team, always. It's just never ever gaining traction. As soon as you think they start gaining traction, they veer off the road. And it's just been the story of this season. They've just never been able to grab their footing since game one. And it's just continued throughout the season. And we're just seeing it completely go off the cliff here.
Do they make a bowl game? Do you think they won one of these last two?
After yes, I mean, look, I would say I overreacted after Pitt, maybe. Um, and they come back and obviously they beat Kansas. I would say no. I just don't know how this group recovers right now. And it's just, maybe senior night, maybe they play with a little bit edge, maybe they play with some emotion. I have no idea. Like
Well,
trying to figure this team out at this point in the season is sad because there's just been zero consistent. I would say they've been consistently inconsistent all season. Is about as consistent as they've been.
yeah, that's one way to put it for sure. I mean, UCF next week, they're 4-6. They're coming off a bye. But like I said, they're offensively just as good as Baylor. And they're not going to throw it as well as Baylor, that's for sure. But they can carve you up on the ground.
And Baylor's played a lot better these last four games. Like Sawyer
I would,
Robinson played really
yes,
well. He's managed offense really well. Like they've done a lot of good things, and they've done some things defensively. If you go back and look at some of their losses, they were in the game most of the time. So it wasn't like this is a bad Baylor team, but this is 100% a game that they should have won at home. Like you could maybe understand it if it was in Waco. Like
yeah.
okay, they got into it. It just kind of worked out that way, but not at home. Like you shouldn't constantly lose momentum at home. You shouldn't constantly be losing at home. Like something's amiss, and yeah, I would say things need to change. But kind of the landscape of what's going on right now, they just can't do it. And my question, I think, it is always a question: what's the move if you want to get rid of Neal Brown? Because right now, Indiana football just paid their head coach Kurt Singley Jr. $8 million a year. That's Indiana. They're not known for paying head coaches $8 million a year. So you're starting to see like the how these TV contracts are going to really sway things in favor in the Big Ten. And Indiana didn't play a ranked team all year. I think they've beaten what one, two team over, with the record
And
over
I don't think
500.
they've, yeah, I don't
What's
think
the
they
record
beat a
over
ranked team
500?
yet,
No,
for
they
sure.
haven't. I know
Yeah.
that, but I'm saying just a 500 team. I think Nebraska's the only one that fits the billing for that right now. So they're investing
Indiana
money.
this year is almost like West Virginia last year without a couple of the hiccups. Like they're benefiting from an easy schedule, and I don't
If
know,
that's benefiting
maybe
from a
Indiana
much
pulled the
easier
trigger a little too
schedule.
early.
Because hell, West Virginia's had to play Penn State the last 2 years, and Indiana doesn't have to play them this year. So the point I was trying to make, and they're getting to pay $8 million in a conference that just got a boatload of money. They've played 10 games and haven't played a ranked team. Meanwhile, one of the conferences getting left behind. One program played four teams at one point that were ranked.
Yeah.
So there's a huge discrepancy, and then they're talking about paying. They've just signed their head coach for $8 million. West Virginia doesn't even touch that. And so if you're talking about getting a new head coach, you're going to buy out a contract, buy out the assistants, and you're going to bring in a whole new coach and a whole new assistants. Where's that money coming from all of a sudden? So there's a bigger issue that's coming up here because who are you going to get? Because you're not going to go outbid anybody at this point. You couldn't before. Now your marking's way down, way, way, way down.
I agree with that because it is facts. You're not going to pay a coach $8 million at West Virginia. It's just not going to happen. My statement on this has always been if you feel like you can do better, then you need to make a change. But I understand the financial side of it, but you can't be I don't think you can be afraid to make a move if you feel like there's better
But
things out
that's
there
the
to get this program
question.
on track.
What's
But
better at the rate that you're going to get it after every coach has been paid over $5-6 million? That's the question. Who's better at this point in time?
well, I mean, I'm looking up his salary right now just because I'm curious. Um, all right, yeah, yeah. Here you go, right here. Kenny Dillingham, 3.9 million. I'm not saying they're going to hire Kenny Dillingham, but there's a lot of Kenny Dillinghams out there that you can go and buy for or get for $4 million. And I'm not saying that it's going to be success. There's no guarantee that changing head coaches is going to translate to success, but you can't be afraid to make that jump because if you're afraid, then you're going to be stuck in mediocrity for forever. And I'm not saying
Right.
that.
but
that Neal
you're
Brown's ever going to
the
make that
out.
jump. But
You're hoping for outliers in a world that's it's not. It's just that's not reality. Like you're not.
right, so that's
You're
the
hoping to
problem.
hit a home run, but you're probably more than likely one or two things are going to happen. If they have success within the first 2 years and they're not a West Virginia guy and they want to be here to see West Virginia succeed, they're gone. You're right back to where you started and hoping you hit a home run again. And you're basically hoping you hit a home run with someone that's money's not the most priority. They want to build a program. And my point is, like, that's not a reason to keep a coach, but you have to be able to find that coach after the big dogs at this point have
Yeah.
sifted through everybody. So you're not only just trying to find a guy, you're trying to find a guy behind the guy behind the guy that no one else knows about, that you just found the X's and O's guys, the rah guy that's going to do everything right. And that's a tough ask at this point in time, especially when you don't know everything. And my point is like what me and you were talking about, they need to change something and it just has not translated here right now. And I think it's just like they're going to have to look internally and really kind of figure this thing out and hope that they can finally do something. But there's just no optimism in right now, and everyone wants to cut loose, and I just don't think that is reality at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think both things can be true. You can criticize Neil Brown and say it's not been good enough and they need to make a change or there needs to be change. But it's also valid to question what the situation would look like when you do go through the change financially and who you're going to find. But like I said, you can't be afraid to make a change. You just
Yeah,
can't. Like you have to put the whole perspective of
because it's not just the
program.
head coach you got to pay. You got
It's
to
the whole
pay for
staff.
quality
Yeah.
assistants. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of the problem is when you can't even pay your head coach a competitive salary, you're not going to get the quality of assistants
You,
that
you
you
get what
want
you pay
at a
for.
compet. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I think the easiest way to
There's just so much to take in, and you're just I think for everybody it's frustrating, and it's just that's why these guys get paid what they do. Like something's got to change somewhere. Like it's not working, and when I think the frustration for me is we had to hear Garrett was a top 100 player entering the season. This team's different. This team's this, and it is not working
no.
whatsoever. So something somewhere's got to change.
The best case scenario, well, best case scenario would be you just win these last two games, you win the bowl game convincingly, and you start to buy into that Kool-Aid again for next year. Although most fans probably won't do that, but at least the administration would. You'd finish 8-5 or whatever, and then they just hit it off next year and they turn the corner. That's best case scenario. Second best case scenario, I think, if you want to go in the other direction, is and this is going to be challenging in some ways because there's not this big time donor out there like Houston had, right, with Dana. But maybe there's a situation where Neal Brown understands the situation, finds another job that pays him well enough. But where that is, who's going to have a deep enough pockets to be kind of close to what he's making at West Virginia? I don't know that there is one. But who knows? I didn't expect Houston to pony up as much as they did to go get Dana either. So we'll see, but that's kind of the two things you're looking at. But I think the one thing we can all agree with is West Virginia deserves better. Flat out, that's the end of the story. West Virginia deserves better, whether it's Neal Brown or somebody else. This team and this program have been so much better in years past. It's a rich tradition program, 15th winningest program in all time in all of college football. You got to have better results. You can't just be stuck in this limbo of being an average football team for 6 years and thinking that something's going to just
Well,
miraculously
to
change.
be fair, they've been average since joining the Big 12. It's been quite some time.
Right.
And the only time that
But
they really played above average, if you go back and look at history, was obviously Major Harris. And after Virginia Tech, Miami, and Boston College left for the ACC, then you had Pat White. That's it. And you can go back and look at it. The 10-win season they had under Holgorsen, arguably that schedule ended up being weak. Got blown out by Oklahoma, went to the bowl game, got blown out by Miami. And that's your reality right now. And West Virginia has not had anything that resembles anything above average since joining the Big 12. You can argue, okay, 2018 maybe. Well, they ended up being average because look at their record. And lost that bowl game too because everybody opted out. So
Yeah, I
you
mean,
really
I
you
think
it's more about it's not just getting it's about getting just in some ways respectable because at least you played teams tough. But you turned away from Dana because you wanted to get over that hump. Well, now you're not even at the hump. So
it took a few steps backward. I think that's my issue with the whole thing too. Is like at least under Dana, you had a sense that you would have a chance at least until some point in the season. With this
false hope.
regime,
It was false hope.
it was
But it
false
was
hope, but
hope.
at least it was there. You
It
don't
was
have any
something.
false hope right now. And with Dana, like you play who's on your schedule, right? Like even the 2016 10-win team, they won 10 games. Like Neal Brown has not won 10 games, even last year with a really weak schedule, which is, in my opinion, that schedule last year was weaker than the one in 2016 because you had Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, Houston, and you lost two of those games. And they only won 9 games, and they went 8-4 in the regular season. So, like, that's the big difference right there. 2016, light schedule, but you won 10 games. 2023, light schedule, but you only won 8 in the regular season. Under Dana, yeah, the 2018 year, like it was disappointing end, but they had it. If they beat Oklahoma in the final game of the year, they're going to the Big 12 championship game. They have
Well,
not
if they would
anywhere
have beaten
close.
an average Oklahoma, wouldn't have let an average Oklahoma State
That
team
too.
come back the week before. Oklahoma game doesn't even
But
matter. They would
but
have
the
just played
point
them anyway.
but the point there is they were in contention in the final 2 weeks of the year twice under Dana. They've not come anywhere near that under Neal Brown. Even last year, they were out of it, even at 8-4. So it's it's a struggle. Like it's frustrating, I'm sure, but West Virginia deserves better. Again, I don't know if it should be under Neal, under somebody else. That's for the administration to decide. But I think we can all agree that this program needs to be better. It should be better. So, end of rant. On to UCF, which will more than likely be a noon kick, I'm sure.
It's
Cannot
just
wait for
going to
that
be an endless rant all week of like, oh, let's drop eight and watch the receivers just run by the entire defense because that's what's happened all year.
one. Oh, goodness. Well, at
Of course,
least
of
this
course,
week it won't be dropping
The way
eight.
Malzahn coaches at time, he'll just try to power football because
This week it won't
he
be
makes about as much sense as everybody else right now.
this week it won't be dropping eight. It'll be putting 8 guys in the box trying to figure out how to stop UCF's run game because they're going to run the ball about 65 times in this game,
Yeah, right
probably.
into West Virginia's wheelhouse. Just like I said,
Yeah.
they'll run right to West Virginia's strengths, which, whatever. There's other bad coaches out there, folks. Sadly to say. It's just college football is very comical at times.
Yeah. And yeah,
If you can just take a step back and look at just all the coaching that's going. I mean, David Aranda went for an onside kick for whatever reason.
up 14.
Gave West
Goodness gracious.
Virginia the ball outside the field for the time. I mean, it's comical. Like it's just some coaches rely on so much analytics that they just coach themselves out of a job.
The Big 12 has been very average this year, outside of BYU and Colorado and Iowa State. Surprisingly, Arizona State. That's the one I keep kind of going back to with the, it doesn't take 6 years thing. I mean, Arizona State, they're not loaded with money. I mean, they're not this rich historic program like a West Virginia is. And I'm not saying West Virginia's Georgia, but I mean, it's not like Arizona State's rolling in money. It's not like Iowa State's rolling in money. So those two teams are in similar situations, similar setups, but they're having success. You're not. That's the frustrating thing about this. You got to figure that part of it out. The NIL part, the transfer portal part, the development part. But outside of those few teams that I just named, everybody else from basically West Virginia on down is just average or below average. I mean, you got a bunch of 4, 5, 6 lost teams in here, um, and it's just been one of those years where the Big 12 just beats up on each other. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting finish to the season. UCF comes to town next week for Senior Day. It'll be true blue. All fans encouraged to wear blue to the game, and we'll see how much of a crowd there's going to be for this one too.
gonna be sad. So it's a shame for this kid's
Yeah.
been here for a while. Someone like Gary Green to go out like that, but you know,
You win the game probably doesn't have that feel to it going into senior day, but it is what it is. West Virginia UCF, again, time right now as we record is unknown, but it'll probably be released the moment this thing drops, and it'll probably be a noon kick. So I'll just go and throw that out there.
it's 3:30 kickoff is 3:30. UCF is 3:30.
It just came out.
Yeah, it came out. Yeah,
Well, there you go.
Bob recording just came out.
Breaking news.
That's no way breaking. I think it came out at 7 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning on Sunday. So whenever this comes out, that's when that came out. And yeah,
So West Virginia UCF final home game of the year, and then they'll go to Texas Tech to wrap things up.
on ESPNU too. So just in
Oh,
case,
great.
3:30 kickoff, ESPNU.
That'll really please everybody. West Virginia.
Better than ESPN Plus winning.
True, true. So that'll do it for us here today. That's Christopher Hall. I'm Schuyler Callihan. Make sure you hit the subscribe button here on our YouTube page at West Virginia on SI. Give us a follow on X at SI_WVU. We'll be back on Tuesday to talk about some more nonsense of this football team, and then we'll talk the keys of the game against UCF on Wednesday. And as always, the Walkthrough Game Day show with Eugene and I on Thursday to preview the Knights and the Mountaineers. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you back here on Tuesday.